Upon arrival at the residence, the deputies noticed that the front door was open. As they approached the house, they seen what they believed to be someone laying on the floor. They gave verbal commands. There was no response. And at that time, there was a gunshot that went off.
Every parent has a set way in which they want to raise their children. However, in the case of the Stockdales of Beach City, Ohio, the bizarrely strict house rules might have directly contributed to innocent people losing their lives. The strangest thing about the Stockdale family massacre is that we don't know the motive. The perpetrator has yet to mention why he did what he did, and police have been quiet on those details as well. In spite of all of that, we'll try to unpack the gruesome details of the Stockdale family massacre today. It's a case that reveals just how much darkness can be hiding beneath the surface of a seemingly happy family, and how the darkness can build up and violently explode without any warning. The Stockdales were a deeply religious family that decided to move away from the city. Tim and Kathy Stockdale wanted their children to internalize wholesome Christian values, and they felt like the best way to do this was to isolate their children from the real world. The family moved to a remote farm in Beach City, Ohio, where they raised their 4 sons, Calvin, Charles, Jacob, and James. By all accounts, Kathy was a very strict mother. She instituted a series of rules that the boys had to follow, otherwise they'd be punished, and rewarded them for following the rules with meager prizes like being able to listen to a radio show.
We moved out to the farm to develop wholesome values in our children.
The day we moved, we heard gunshots in our neighborhood, and I knew we had made the right decision.
That's not to say that the family was completely without joy, of course. Kathy and Tim loved bluegrass music, and their children showed a lot of musical promise from a young age. Jacob especially became a fiddle-playing prodigy, learning how to play the instrument at an age of 7 and mastering it before he hit puberty. As a result of this talent, Jacob won awards all across Ohio. He even became Ohio State Grand Fiddle Champion in 2012, a few years after a certain event that likely sowed the seeds of the homicides to come. The Stockdales eventually formed a family band, with Calvin playing the banjo, Charles the mandolin, James on the upright bass, and Jacob on the fiddle, of course. Their father Tim fronted the band on guitar and as the main vocalist, though all of the sons sang from time to time.
Oh, Lordy, Mama, got him in the bottom of a raven sheet. When the whistle blows, I gotta go. Well, Mama, oh, man, you suck a red train.
However, the boys didn't have much to enjoy apart from the family band. Their parents didn't allow them to watch TV, play video games, listen to most types of music, or even make friends with anyone outside of the family. Kathy saw dating as a physical danger to her children since she was worried that they might get someone pregnant and prohibited them from talking to any girls. This meant that the supposedly wholesome family was effectively a prison for all 4 of the children. But in the early 2000s, a TV show called Wife Swap was making waves. In the show, 2 families would swap wives or mothers for a few weeks. The families were usually very different from each other to highlight the diversity of family life in America and to use the tension and conflict that would inevitably occur for comedic and dramatic effect. The Stockdale boys begged their parents to participate in the show. In 2008, Kathy and Tim made the fateful decision to agree. Little did Kathy know she'd just started a sequence of events that would culminate in her brutal murder. When the producers of Wife Swap saw the Stockdale way of life, they knew they had solid TV gold on their hands. They had also gotten in touch with the Tonkovich family in Illinois, who were basically the polar opposites of the Stockdales. Lori Tonkovich didn't impose any rules on her children. They would wake up whenever they wanted, wear whatever they wanted, and eat a diet consisting mostly of fast food. Needless to say, when Lori swapped places with Kathy, she was shocked by just how strict the mother of the household could be, and especially when she read about the routine the boys had to follow. After being woken up at 7:30, the boys had exactly 4 minutes to get to the breakfast table. Otherwise, they'd be fined 25 cents. They'd then perform all sorts of chores on the farm and in the house. If they completed their chores with a so-called glad heart, which is to say they didn't complain about how hard they were forced to work, they'd get tokens that they could exchange for little pleasures like listening to a family-friendly radio show under strict supervision.
You get to listen to the radio?
Yeah.
And who
something.
picks those?
Mom does.
Oh, this is great.
This is 100 tokens, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay with you?
I would rather not have to do the tokens to get like the radio show.
After finishing their chores, the boys gathered together for homeschooling. They couldn't even get out of the house to study, which meant they had basically no contact with other kids their age. Kathy possibly taught them a very Christian-oriented syllabus, which meant less of a focus on science and facts and more on biblical stories. During the show, Lori got so upset when she saw how the boys were living that she broke down in tears.
God, I feel so sad for these kids. I'm gonna take them all home with me. I asked him what he would like to do if he could do anything, and he doesn't even know.
I mean, they need to know that there's other ways of doing things and then let them decide what they want to do.
I didn't realize this was gonna be so hard.
She wanted to have a good impact on the kids' lives, so she decided to introduce them to some of the things they'd missed out on. This meant setting up a cable TV connection and buying a video game console. The boys seemed excited about the games, but Jacob notably said he didn't see any value in what he was doing. James talked about how guilty he felt, but that he still loved playing video games. This also showed just how deep the indoctrination went in the Stockdale family. When Lori encouraged Jacob to watch some TV, he reportedly broke down crying and ran outside. Lori then followed him and asked him what was wrong, and the answer she got was as shocking as it was heartbreaking. Jacob said that he was worried about going to hell if he watched TV, even though Lori was most likely showing him wholesome family-oriented content. She tried her best to change how the Stockdales lived, but there was no chance they'd listen. They were far too set in their ways, and the fact that Tim was there to reinforce Kathy's rules didn't help matters much. As the episode drew to a close, Kathy and Lori had very different takes on what the experience had taught them.
You can do things just for fun, that everything doesn't have to be written out and structured.
It wasn't so bad now, was it?
I have a better idea as to what I don't want my family to be. I can't think of anything here at this family that I would want to bring back.
One thing anyone would notice is that Kathy had an extremely rigid personality. If she thought something was right, no one could convince her to change her mind. Even though Lori had been immersed in an environment that was so alien to her, Kathy seemed unable to even imagine a life that wasn't as regimented or controlled as the one she made her kids live. Tim's unwavering support meant that she had no one to criticize her, and there's a good chance that many, if not most, of the rules came from the family patriarch himself. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. The Stockdales' experience with wife swap in 2008 didn't seem to change anything, at least on the surface. Years went by, and the boys finally started leaving home and living independently. Calvin went off to Hillsdale College in Michigan, far away from his parents' influence, and started working as a teacher at the Institute. His younger brother Charles headed to Philadelphia to become a med student. It is important to note that the boys didn't choose to go to college in Ohio. They traveled thousands of miles away, which seemed to suggest that they were running from something or perhaps someone. This meant that by 2017, only 26-year-old Jacob and 21-year-old James were still living with their parents. They were old enough to leave, and it's intriguing that they didn't because it adds more mystery to the events that followed. Why didn't Jacob, a man in his mid-20s, just move away from the family home? There's an explanation for James deciding to stay. He was studying business at a nearby university, and he had dreams of managing the family band one day. But as for Jacob, one has to wonder why he didn't just start a life of his own. The Stockdale family band kept going, albeit without the involvement of Calvin or Charles. It became a trio and continued to perform at events across the state, amassing a decent following and even recording a few albums. But apart from that, there was simply no reason for Jacob to stay in the tiny town of Beechview. It's possible that this was the whole problem. Jacob had nowhere to go. He might not even have known who he was. And even though he might have seemed perfectly all right on the outside, inside a sense of turmoil had started to build, and it would soon erupt in a bloody explosion of violence. At around 4:36 on June 15th, 2017, Stark County Police received a 911 call that had ended with the caller suddenly hanging up. This prompted them to head to the Stockdale residence where the call had come from to investigate the suspicious occurrence. When they arrived, they heard a loud bang and rushed into the home. That's when they saw Jacob with a shotgun wound to his head. He was still alive, but barely so, and the presence of the firearm next to him meant that the wound was almost certainly self-inflicted. Police headed upstairs to continue their search, and when they entered the bathroom, they found Kathy and James lying dead on the floor, their bodies mangled by massive sprays of shotgun pellets. Tim was luckily outside of the home at the time, but he was understandably devastated when he found out. There was only one reasonable explanation for what happened. Jacob had killed his mother and brother and then tried to take his own life. However, his self-inflicted gunshot wound meant that he needed urgent medical attention. He was taken to a local hospital where doctors treated his wounds, while everyone tried to understand why he would have done such a thing.
It's hard to, kind of surmise what the motive may have been. There's some speculation. We don't really want to get into that part of it, but we'll continue to investigate this case and try to determine if there's a motive. Just do not know.
When Calvin found out about his mother and little brother getting murdered, he released a statement saying, "James, our youngest brother, has always been a catalyst of family fun. Aside from being a gifted musician, James enjoyed dancing and had an innate love of people. James was working on a business degree and hoped to go to the business side of entertainment. He leaves behind many friends and a family that love him dearly." Tim also released a statement which read, "Kathy has been my beloved wife of 32 years and a wonderful mother to our 4 sons. She loved nothing more than being a mother and grandmother. She had a strong love of learning and was passionate about her Christian faith, natural health, and organic farming." In both statements, it seemed like Tim and Calvin were intentionally avoiding mentioning their brother. In fact, the only cursory acknowledgement of what Jacob had done came from an earlier statement from Calvin in which he thanked the medical center that treated him, though he didn't mention him specifically. Jacob was seriously wounded after his suicide attempt. He lost sight in his left eye and suffered serious brain damage, which cast some doubts on whether he'd be fit to stand trial. Police decided not to charge him until he had fully recovered from his injuries, which led to over a year of uncertainty about what would happen next. On September 26, 2018, Stark County Police finally charged Jacob with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and his bail was set at $1 million. On October 9th, Jacob's defense attorney filed a motion to determine his competency to stand trial. Jacob pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity and was sent to Heartland Behavioral Health Hospital for observation. Jacob spent over a year at Heartland, where doctors constantly tried to test his mental competency. They held mock trials where they used legal terminology and attempted to assess if Jacob understood how the court system worked. The culprit also made 2 escape attempts during his stint at the Mental Health Institute. The first occurred in November of 2019 when he tried to hide behind a stack of books until he was caught. 2 months later, Jacob tried blending in with a crowd of people leaving the institute, but he was caught once again. This showed that he had enough mental competence to stand trial, but it would take more than this to convince the court. His sanity hearings were postponed multiple times due to the pandemic, and it wasn't until September of 2020 that he appeared in court via video link. For some reason, Jacob refused to respond when the judge addressed him. It's possible that he had a fear of technology due to not using a computer all of his life. Or maybe he was truly disoriented by what was happening. It's also possible that his silence was a ruse to strengthen his insanity plea. But either way, his refusal to respond in court didn't work in his favor.
Stockdale, are you able to hear me? First of all, officer, can you hear me?
Yes, Your Honor, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stockdale, I am Judge Frank Forcioni. Are you able to hear me today? Okay, he is not responding. My first concern was whether they could hear, and the officer standing behind him can hear.
He was eventually deemed fit to stand trial by a psychologist on December 31st, 2020. The trial date was constantly pushed back due to the pandemic, and behind the scenes, the Stockdale family took the opportunity to plead on Jacob's behalf. Even though he'd killed Kathy and James, the Stockdales begged the judge to give him a lenient sentence. If he was convicted, it's possible that the judge agreed as long as Jacob pleaded guilty, or perhaps there was a shift in Jacob's own mindset. Whatever the case may be, on April 28, 2021, nearly 4 years after he killed his family members in cold blood, Jacob pleaded guilty to both murders. The judge seemed to have agreed to the Stockdales' request for leniency, since he sentenced him to a surprisingly short 15 years for each sentence. Jacob will be eligible for parole in 2048, and from the looks of things, his family might be willing to bring him back into the fold. They've clearly forgiven him for all he's done, likely due to their commitment to Christian values. The only piece of the puzzle that's still missing is the motive. And there are several theories that might explain why Jacob killed his family members that day. Some psychologists have theorized that Kathy had a severe form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. The way she regimented her kids' routines is a sign of that, and the diet she fed them might be another clue to the diagnosis. You see, Kathy never let her kids eat anything she didn't make. Even if they went out, they'd never go to a restaurant. Instead, Kathy would prepare a huge meal that they'd take with them. The Stockdales were also very big on the idea of organic foods and natural living. Jacob might have had some kind of mental illness, perhaps even OCD inherited from his mother, and a life of isolation made it far worse than it otherwise would have been. Kathy strongly believed that leisure and fun of any kind were sinful. Life was about work. Nothing was more morally righteous than keeping yourself busy throughout the day, which meant that Jacob had no opportunity to form his own personality. He was entirely dependent on his mother to shape his routine and tell him how to live his life, and when it comes to his desire to commit murder, there are two possibilities. The first is that Jacob simply snapped and wanted to take revenge for the perceived abuse he'd experienced at the hands of his mother. The second is that he simply wanted to escape, and since he didn't want James to go through what he'd experienced, he killed him as well. There's no way to know what was going through Jacob's mind before he pulled the trigger. He seemed like just another normal guy in his mid-20s, up until the point he became a cold-blooded killer. On Kathy Stockdale's official YouTube channel, the last upload is of a song recorded by Jacob and James to celebrate James's 21st birthday. It's a song about the fear of growing up, and in it, James asks if there's another option. The brothers then sing a beautiful rendition of the song Tall Buildings, which they uploaded exactly 3 months before one killed the other. Jacob doesn't look like a murderer in the video. If anything, it shows just how much love the brothers had, a love that might have been the feeling that drove Jacob to pull the trigger.
Thank you everyone for all the birthday well wishes last week. I had a great day full of friends and good music. It doesn't get much better than that. You'd think at 21 years old I'd be ready to grow up and join adulthood. Not for me. Yeah. Is there a third option? I wish there was a third option.
What do you think of this case? Did Stockdale receive a harsh enough sentence for his crimes? Do you think his strict upbringing drove him to murder? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.